In the shadowed hollows of eastern Kentucky, where the ancient Appalachians clawed at the sky like the fingers of some buried giant, the year 1882 hung heavy with the weight of unspoken sins. The creek whispered through the underbrush, a serpentine vein of black water that sliced the land belonging to the Harlan family, a clan as rooted and twisted as the oaks that guarded their weathered cabin. Old Man Harlan, his face etched with the lines of coal dust and regret, presided over his brood of 5 daughters, silent girls with eyes like storm clouds, who moved through their days with the quiet grace of deer sensing a predator's gaze. It began on a moonless night in late spring, when the air thickened with the scent of damp earth and blooming nightshade. The youngest, Eliza, awoke in a cold sweat, her nightdress clinging to her like a shroud, convinced that something had slipped into her room through the cracked window, a breath, a touch, a voice murmuring promises from the dark. She said nothing at first, dismissing it as the fever dreams that plagued the hollow during flood seasons. But as the weeks dragged on, her belly swelled unnaturally, a secret blooming beneath her skin that no young girl of 16 should bear alone. One by one, the others followed. Mary, the middle child with hair like spun copper, confessed over supper, her voice a tremor that shattered the family's fragile peace. Then came Sarah, the strong one who tended the garden, her hands dirt-stained and trembling as she admitted the same affliction. Even the twins, Abigail and Ruth, inseparable shadows with matching freckles, whispered their shared terror in the loft, their words overlapping like echoes in a well. All 5, pregnant, their conditions mirroring each other down to the day, as if some invisible thread had woven their fates together in the night. The Harlan cabin, once a bastion against the wilderness, now felt like a trap. Doors creaked without wind, and the creek's babble outside grew louder after dusk, carrying fragments of words that no human throat could form, calls that lured the girls to the water's edge, where the willows dipped low like conspirators. Old Harlan paced the porch with his rifle, eyes scanning the tree line for the man responsible, but the woods gave up nothing but silence and the occasional rustle of unseen things. The daughters spoke little, their voices stolen by the growing weight within them, but in their dreams, they saw him, a figure cloaked in mist, faceless yet familiar, his presence a chill that seeped into their bones. As summer's heat pressed down like a judgment, the mystery deepened. Whispers from the creek evolved into choruses, voices in the dark that promised revelations hidden among the roots and rocks. The girls, bound by blood and burden, began to piece together the fragments, old tales from their mother, long buried, of a spirit that haunted the waters, a guardian or a curse born from the land's forgotten grievances. Yet with each night, the unknown man's influence tightened, drawing them closer to the woods where secrets festered like open wounds, waiting to consume those who dared listen in the dim glow of a single oil lamp flickering on the rough-hewn table. The Harlan cabin felt smaller than ever that late spring evening in 1882. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and simmering beans, the only sounds the crackle of the hearth and the distant, restless murmur of the creek threading through the holler. Old Man Harlan sat at the head, his calloused hands wrapped around a tin cup of chicory coffee, eyes fixed on the flames as if searching for answers in their restless dance. His 5 daughters moved quietly around him, setting bowls and cornbread, their footsteps soft on the puncheon floor, their faces pale and drawn in the wavering light. Eliza, the youngest at 16, lingered longest by the dry sink, her slender frame turned away from the table. She had always been the sensitive one, quick to startle at shadows, prone to wandering off toward the water's edge with a dreamy look that worried her father. For weeks now, she had grown quieter still, eating little, sleeping less, her chestnut hair losing its shine. That night, as the family settled into their places, she remained standing, fingers twisting the hem of her faded calico apron until the cloth threatened to tear. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely louder than the creek outside. "Pa," she began, then stopped, throat working as if the words were stones she had to force up. The room stilled, even the fire seemed to hush. Her sisters, Mary, Sarah, Abigail, and Ruth, lifted their heads in unison, sensing the tremor in her tone. Old Harlan turned slowly, his weathered face creasing with concern. I'm with child," Eliza whispered, the confession spilling out like blood from a fresh cut. The lamp flame guttered as if in shock. Silence crashed down, heavier than any storm that ever rolled through the mountains. Old Harlan's cup clattered against the table, coffee sloshing over the rim. "What did you say, girl?" His voice was low, disbelieving, edged with something close to fear. Eliza's eyes filled, but she did not look away. She repeated it, steadier now, though her whole body shook. "I'm carrying. I swear on the good book, Pa, I ain't been with no man. Not one. I ain't never." Her words trailed into the stunned quiet. Mary reached for her hand across the table, but Eliza pulled back, wrapping her arms around her middle as if already shielding the life within. She told them of the nights she woke drenched in sweat, convinced something had brushed against her skin in the dark, a presence that left no trace but a lingering chill and the faint scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. She spoke of whispers drifting up from the creek, soft and coaxing, promising things she could not quite recall upon waking, promises that left her trembling and strangely hollow. The sisters exchanged glances, unease flickering in their storm-grey eyes. Their father rose slowly, chair scraping like a warning. He crossed to Eliza, placing a rough hand on her shoulder, searching her face for any sign of deceit. Finding none, his own features sagged with a grief deeper than anger. Outside, the creek kept murmuring, its voice rising just enough to thread through the open window, as though it had been waiting for this moment all along. The weeks following Eliza's confession dragged through the holler like a slow fever, each day heavier than the last. Summer heat settled into the cabin, turning the air thick and close, but it was a colder dread that truly chilled the Harlan family. Old Harlan barely spoke, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights spent on the porch, rifle across his knees, listening to the creek's endless murmur as if it might betray the intruder he hunted. The girls moved through their chores in near silence, their movements careful, as though any sudden sound might shatter what little peace remained. It was Mary who broke next. One humid afternoon in early July, she dropped the bucket at the well, water splashing across the packed dirt like dark blood. She stood frozen, one hand pressed low against her abdomen, her copper hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. When she finally came inside, her freckled face was ashen. She did not sit. She simply looked at her father, then at Eliza, and said in a voice thin as reed, "It's happened to me too, Pa, same as her. I swear it." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling through the room. Old Harlan's knuckles whitened around the arms of his chair. He asked the same questions he had asked Eliza: when, how, who, but Mary only shook her head, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. She spoke of waking in the dead of night with the window open though she had latched it tight, of a weight upon her chest she could not explain, of whispers threading through her dreams that tasted of creek water and pine rot. She, too, carried the same impossible swell beneath her apron strings, timed to the day with her youngest sisters. Barely a week later, Sarah, the strong one, who split wood and hauled feed without complaint, came in from the garden at dusk, dirt still clinging to her fingernails. She stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the bruised sky, and said quietly, "I felt it move today." Her voice cracked on the last word. She did not need to explain further. The pattern was carving itself into the family like initials in bark. Then the twins, Abigail and Ruth, confessed together one stormy evening, their words tumbling over each other in the loft as thunder rolled down the mountains. They had dreamed the same dream, a figure at the foot of their shared bed, faceless, cloaked in river mist, reaching out with hands that felt like cold water poured over skin. They woke with the same lingering ache, the same subtle rounding of their bodies, as if the night had marked them in perfect unison. All 5 daughters now carried life they could not name, conceived within days of one another, bound by identical terrors that visited in the dark. The cabin's walls seemed to lean inward, listening. The creek outside sang louder after sunset, its voice splitting into harmonies that brushed against the windows like fingers seeking entry. The girls' eyes, once bright with mountain light, grew shadowed and distant, reflecting something none of them dared speak aloud. By midsummer, the Harlan Holler had become a place of whispers, the kind that slithered along dirt roads and coiled around porch rails before slipping through cracks in cabin walls. Word of the 5 daughters' impossible condition traveled faster than the creek in flood season, carried on the tongues of neighbors who came under pretense of borrowing tools or sharing garden surplus. Old Harlan met them at the gate with a shotgun propped nearby, his greetings curt, his eyes daring anyone to speak the unthinkable aloud. But speak they did, once safely out of earshot. In the scattered settlement down the trace, the general store became the heart of the rumor mill. Men lingered over barrels of nails and sacks of flour, voices low as they traded theories beneath the tin roof's creak. Some blamed a traveling peddler who had passed through in April, though no one could recall his face clearly enough to swear to it. Others muttered about the girls themselves, suggesting secret trysts under the cover of moonlit woods, their silence a shield for shame. But the timing, 5 pregnancies aligned as neatly as fence posts, defied such simple explanations, and darker suspicions took root. The churchwomen gathered on wash day by the branch, hands busy with lye soap and scrub boards, mouths busier still. They spoke of signs, the unnatural bloom of nightshade along the creek bank, crows gathering in unnatural numbers on the Harlan roof ridge, the way the wind carried snatches of unnatural song from the hollow after dark. Witchcraft, they murmured, eyes darting toward the mountains as if the devil himself might be listening. The preacher, a gaunt man with a voice like splitting hickory, devoted a Sunday sermon to the wages of sin and the perils of straying from righteous paths, his gaze lingering too long on the empty Harlan pew. Children were warned away from the trail leading to the cabin, told tales of a faceless man who walked the water without leaving tracks. Deliveries of flour and salt were left at the fork instead of brought to the door. Invitations to barn raisings and quiltings went unanswered, not from the Harlans but from those who once extended them. The family's isolation grew like briars, thick and thorny, until even the smoke rising from their chimney seemed to hang lower, heavier, as though ashamed to drift toward heaven. Inside the cabin, the daughters felt the weight of every sidelong glance on the rare trips to town for necessities. Heads turned in the store aisle, conversations hushed when they passed. The whispers followed them home, echoing in the creak of floorboards and the restless babble of the creek that now sounded less like water and more like voices repeating their names in judgment. Old Harlan nailed an extra board across the inside of the door each night, as if Wood could keep out what the holler had already decided about his girls. As August bled into September, the weight of suspicion and silence drove old Harlan to act. He hitched the mule to the wagon and rode down the trace to the settlement, his jaw set like iron. First he sought out Doc Whitcomb, an aging physician with spectacles thick as bottle glass and hands that trembled from years of laudanum more than age. The doctor agreed to come, though his eyes flicked nervously toward the Harlan holler as if expecting the woods themselves to protest. When Whitcomb arrived 2 days later, dust clinging to his black frock coat, the daughters lined up in the dim parlor like penitents. He examined each one in turn behind a hung quilt, his stethoscope cold against their skin, his questions gentle but probing. He measured, listened, pressed, and palpated, searching for signs of violence or illness that might explain the impossible. Yet he found nothing, no bruises, no tears, no trace of fever or poison. The pregnancies were healthy, progressing as they should, quickened at precisely the same moment. He emerged pale, wiping his brow with a handkerchief that smelled faintly of ether, and told Harlan privately that science offered no answers here. The girls were intact, yet not. The doctor muttered something about hysterical manifestation before hurrying back to his wagon, refusing payment with a shake of his head. Unsatisfied, Harlan rode next to the county seat, a cluster of clapboard buildings squatting beside a muddy river. He demanded the sheriff's attention, pounding the desk until the tin star rattled. Sheriff Rawls, a thick-necked man with a tobacco-stained mustache, listened to the story with growing unease. He agreed to investigate, more to quiet the old man's rage than from belief in the tale. A posse of 3 deputies, boys barely old enough to shave, accompanied Rawls back to the holler the following week. They searched the woods for days, combing the creek banks and ridges with rifles slung and dogs straining at leashes. They followed every trail, overturned rocks, probed hollow logs, and dragged the deeper pools with grappling hooks. What they found chilled them more than any fugitive might have. Strange carvings freshly cut into beech and oak trunks, symbols like twisted runes, circles pierced by arrows, figures with elongated limbs that seemed to writhe when viewed from the corner of the eye. No footprints led to or from the trees, no broken branches marked a man's passage. The dogs whined and tucked tails, refusing to track any scent but damp earth and decay. Rawls questioned the daughters separately under the watchful eye of their father, but their stories never wavered, whispers in the night, dreams of mist and cold touch, no memory of a flesh-and-blood intruder. The sheriff left with promises to keep looking, yet his reports grew shorter, his visits fewer. The carvings remained unexplained, the searches fruitless. The creek kept its counsel, murmuring through the underbrush as if amused by the futile hunt. The cabin stood ringed by unanswered questions, the woods closing tighter around secrets no lantern or lawman could illuminate. As autumn stripped the leaves from the hickories and turned the creek to a ribbon of polished obsidian, the nights grew longer and the cabin colder, though no wind found its way through the chinked walls. The daughters, bellies now rounding beneath loose wool dresses, moved like sleepwalkers through their days, eyes ringed with bruise-colored shadows. Sleep came fitfully, broken by the same dream that visited each of them in turn, the creek rising in silver threads through the floorboards, lapping at their beds, carrying a chorus of voices that spoke in perfect, chilling unison. At first the voices were soft, almost tender, threading through the dark like lullabies sung in a language half-remembered from childhood. They called the girls by names their mother had whispered before fever took her years ago, names no living soul in the holler still used. Eliza woke once with tears on her cheeks, certain she had heard little Starling breathed against her ear. Mary clutched her quilt to her throat after a night of hearing "Copper Girl, come home." Sarah, who prided herself on fearing nothing, found her hands trembling as the voices promised strength beyond any axe or plow. The twins woke clutching each other, whispering of identical invitations murmured in overlapping tones that made their skin crawl. Then, one frost-rimed evening in late October, the voices changed. They grew insistent, no longer content to wait for dreams. The girls heard them while awake, while churning butter, while feeding the hearth, while mending by lamplight. The words spilled from the direction of the creek, clear as spring water yet carrying the weight of deep earth. "Come to us. Bring what grows within. We will show you everything." The sound braided 5 separate strands into one impossible harmony, rising and falling with the water's rush over stones. That same night, all 5 daughters rose from their beds as if pulled by invisible cords. Barefoot, nightgowns fluttering like moth wings, they drifted to the windows and pressed their palms to the cold glass. Outside, the creek gleamed under a thin moon, its surface disturbed by ripples that formed fleeting shapes, faces, hands, figures standing just beyond the willows. For one breathless moment, each girl saw the same vision, a tall silhouette at the water's edge, arms outstretched, head tilted as though listening to music only it could hear. Mist curled around its feet, and where its face should have been there was only darkness shaped like absence. They stood transfixed until old Harlan's hoarse shout shattered the spell, his lantern swinging wildly as he burst into the room. The vision vanished, the creek fell silent. But the daughters carried the memory like brands beneath their skin, the voices now etched deeper than before, promising revelations that waited just beyond the tree line. The air in the cabin thickened with the scent of wet leaves and something older, something that had been patient for generations and was growing restless. November brought the first hard frost, silvering the creek banks and turning the breath of the Harlan family to fleeting ghosts in the lantern light. The daughters, heavy now with child, spent more hours huddled near the hearth, their hands resting instinctively on the taut curves beneath their aprons. Old Harlan watched them with eyes hollowed by vigilance, the rifle never far from reach, yet even he could feel the cabin shrinking around them, as though the walls themselves leaned in to listen. One rain-lashed evening, while thunder grumbled distant in the ridges, Sarah rose stiffly from her chair and crossed to the old pine chest that stood beneath the loft ladder. It had belonged to their mother, locked since her death a decade past, its key long lost or hidden. But that night, driven by a restlessness she could not name, Sarah pried the rusted hasp with a fire poker until the lid groaned open. Inside lay folded quilts yellowed with age, a christening gown eaten by moths, and, wrapped in oilskin at the very bottom, a small leather-bound diary no thicker than a hymn book. She carried it to the table, the others gathering close without a word. The pages crackled like dry leaves as she opened them, revealing their grandmother's spidery script. Evelyn Harlan, dead these 30 years, a woman spoken of only in hushed tones for her queer ways and fondness for wandering the woods alone. The entries began innocently enough: plantings, weather, births, deaths. But as the girls turned deeper, the tone shifted, the ink growing darker, pressed harder into the paper. Evelyn wrote of a drought in 1851 that withered crops and soured milk, of desperate prayers unanswered by any church god. She described walking the creek at midnight, barefoot and fasting, seeking relief for her starving kin. There, beneath the ancient willow that still leaned over the deepest pool, she met something, a presence cloaked in river mist, neither man nor beast, with a voice like water over stone. It offered bounty in exchange for devotion, a pact sealed not with blood but with breath, with promise, with the unspoken surrender of what was most precious. The girls read on, breath catching in unison. Their grandmother had borne 7 children after that night, though only their mother survived infancy. Evelyn recorded yearly visits to the creek, offerings left on a flat stone, locks of hair, drops of milk, whispered gratitudes. But the final entries grew frantic, warning of a debt that compounded with time, of a hunger that would one day claim more than trinkets or words. She wrote of dreams in which the figure returned, no longer content to wait, demanding heirs of its own choosing to walk the land in its stead. The diary ended abruptly, the last page smeared as though tears or rain had fallen upon it. In the margin, scrawled in trembling capitals, "It comes for the daughters when the blood runs thin." The 5 sisters sat motionless, the crackle of the fire suddenly loud, the rain on the roof a mocking echo of the creek's endless song. Outside, the willows scratched at the eaves like fingers seeking entry, and the air carried the faint, unmistakable scent of deep water and something ancient stirring beneath it. The first snow fell in early December, soft and silent, blanketing the holler in a hush that felt less like peace and more like the world holding its breath. The daughters, great with child now, moved slowly through the cabin's narrow rooms, their faces pale and luminous in the firelight, eyes fixed on distances no one else could see. The voices from the creek had grown intimate, no longer calling from afar but murmuring directly against their ears, day and night, threading promises through every waking moment and every dream. They spoke of release, of belonging, of a birthright waiting beneath the ancient willow where their grandmother had once knelt. Old Harlan nailed the windows shut and barred the door with an extra beam, but the voices slipped through cracks like smoke. He watched his girls with growing despair, noting how they tilted their heads in unison at sounds only they could hear, how their hands cradled their bellies with a tenderness that seemed less maternal than reverent. Sleep became impossible for him. Each creak of the settling cabin jerked him upright, rifle in hand, certain the thing from the woods had finally come inside. On the night of the winter solstice, the longest and blackest of the year, the pull became unbearable. The fire burned low, casting long shadows that danced like supplicants on the walls. One by one, the daughters rose from their pallets, moving with the fluid certainty of those guided by a will stronger than their own. Eliza led, her bare feet silent on the cold floor, followed by Mary, Sarah, and the twins. They gathered at the door, fingers working the bar with unnatural coordination until it slid free. The frigid air rushed in, carrying the sharp scent of snow and the deeper, older smell of the creek wet stone, decaying leaves, something metallic like blood on water. Old Harlan woke to the draft, shouting their names as he lunged from his chair, but the girls were already outside, nightgowns billowing like pale banners as they drifted down the path toward the water. He stumbled after them, lantern swinging wildly, voice cracking with pleas and threats alike. The snow muffled everything except the creek's song, now risen to a triumphant chorus that vibrated in the bones. At the willow's edge, beneath branches heavy with ice, the 5 stood in a half-circle facing the black water. Mist rose in slow coils, shaping itself into the tall silhouette they knew from dreams. But then Abigail, the quieter twin, always watchful, stepped forward alone. Her face, lit by moonlight, wore an expression of strange serenity. She raised her arms toward the figure, whispering words the others could not catch, words that sounded like surrender. The mist thickened around her, caressing, claiming, while her sisters watched in sudden horror as understanding dawned. Abigail had bargained in secret, trading their shared fate for her own salvation, offering the others as payment to quiet the hunger their grandmother's pact had awakened. The creek answered with a low, approving rumble, the water beginning to rise in deliberate tendrils that reached not for her, but for the 4 who remained. Snow hissed where it touched the advancing blackness, and the voices swelled into a single, accusing note that filled the hollow like judgment. The mist rose faster now, boiling from the creek like breath from a hidden mouth, swallowing the willow's drooping branches until the tree itself seemed to dissolve into the dark. Snowflakes hissed and vanished where they touched the water, leaving only curling steam that carried the scent of deep caves and long-buried things. The 4 betrayed sisters, Eliza, Mary, Sarah, and Ruth, stood rooted at the bank, nightgowns plastered to their swollen bodies by the sudden damp, their breath coming in ragged clouds as the black tendrils climbed their ankles with deliberate patience. Abigail remained apart, arms still raised toward the silhouette that grew more solid with every heartbeat. Its outline sharpened into something taller than any man, limbs too long and jointed wrong, skin gleaming wet as river stone. Where a face should have been there was only a smooth hollow, yet the hollow turned toward each daughter in turn, drinking them in. The voices that had whispered for months now thundered inside their skulls, no longer pleading but claiming, naming the children they carried as its own. Old Harlan's lantern shattered against a rock as he stumbled into the clearing, the flame snuffing out in the snow. He raised the rifle with shaking hands, roaring Abigail's name, demanding she step away from the thing she had summoned. But his voice cracked into silence when the creek answered him directly, a low, resonant note that vibrated through the ground and into his bones, telling him without words that the debt was older than his rage, older than his blood. The water surged higher, no longer content with tendrils. It rose in a smooth, deliberate wave, black and glassy, carrying within it shapes that might have been faces or might have been leaves caught in the current. The four sisters felt the children within them kick in sudden frenzy, as though recognizing home. Sarah tried to back away, but the creek held her fast, gentle as a lover's hand yet unbreakable. Mary reached for Eliza, their fingers brushing once before the mist tore them apart. In the center of the rising dark, the entity extended one elongated arm toward Abigail. She stepped forward willingly, a faint smile on her lips, and the hollow where its face should be leaned close, as though bestowing a kiss that left frost blooming across her skin. Then it turned its attention to the others, and the creek began to sing in earnest, a chorus of every voice the holler had ever lost, every drowned miner, every stillborn child, every promise broken beneath these ancient hills. The wave crested, folding over the four like a blanket pulled by unseen hands. Their cries were brief, swallowed quickly by the water's embrace. Snow continued to fall, soft and indifferent, already filling the footprints that led to the bank. When the mist finally thinned with the first gray hint of dawn, the creek ran clear and quiet again, its surface unbroken, the willow standing solitary guard over nothing but smooth snow and silence.